So we will go ahead and start. Okay, hello, I'm Mary Jones, and I serve as chairperson of the Marriage and Family Therapy Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that's being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. Joyce Baptiste.
Here.
Rebecca Culver-Turner.
Here.
James Godby. Jim, sorry, I'll do that. Geraldine Ingram.
Here.
And John Flinker. Okay, just checking there. I note the following staff members are also present. David Fye.
Here.
Leslie Allen.
Here.
Ashley Van Buskirk.
Here.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals wishing to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at the meeting today as no individuals requested to provide public comment. Because we are conducting the public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I'll state for the record the following information. This meeting is conducted remotely. However, access to the meeting is being conducted by a medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is being conducted remotely, the requirements of KOMA are not suspended. As such, we'll be conducting this meeting pursuant to KOMA. On May 5th, 2021, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who requested notice of the advisory committee meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website at ksbsrb.ks.gov, and you can obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting materials was posted to the board's website on the day of the meeting. You may also request a copy of the agenda by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if there are any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240. A recording of the meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all. I'd like to get the approval of the minutes from the April 20th meeting, which were attached in your meeting materials. So if we could review those, and whenever we're done reviewing, if there aren't any changes, I'll take a motion to approve.
I move that we approve the minutes of the 20th.
Thank you, Jim. Is there a second?
I second it.
Second. Oh,
I'll take Joyce for the second. And all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you very much. David, we'll turn the meeting over to you for your report.
Thank you, Mary. I'd like to go ahead and just alert the advisory committee to a handful of items. First, so during the pandemic, there has been a series of states of emergency that have been declared initially by the governor and then through a combination of actions by the governor and the legislature. The state of emergency related to the pandemic in Kansas officially ended on June 15th. There were a series of executive orders that were issued by the governor in line with the states of emergency or the extensions. The one that we've talked about a little bit previously has been one that affected the BSRB that directed regulatory boards to delay the expiration of licenses that had expired during the pandemic. And so that's what we had been doing and holding these licenses, essentially not expiring them so long as those executive orders were in place. There was an extension of the state of emergency, which was going to end on March 31st. And that was extended on April 1st. But after that time, the governor issued executive orders that were a little different, that provided some flexible language to regulatory bodies to go ahead and begin to have the option to go back to enforcing the expiration of those licenses that had expired. And so the board met on May 10th, and we provided information to the board that we had talked with other regulatory bodies that were going back to essentially back to normal and enforcing the expiration of those licenses. It does help in terms of communication to licensees to let them know when they need to take action on their license. There's also a helpful aspect of it in terms of the revenue coming in according to how it's been estimated previously. And so while I think it was helpful, we talked to the board on the May 10th meeting, and we expressed our desire to ask the board if they could go back to normal following the notice that was provided to licensees about this change. And the board did vote to go back to enforcing the expiration of those licenses. The executive order did call for 15 days notice to be provided to licensees. So we sent a message to anyone who had an expired license that had expired during the pandemic. And we sent that out on May 11th and let them know that according to what the board had decided, after May 28th, we would go ahead and count those licenses as expired. And we asked everyone to take notice then. We also posted the same message on the board's website for anyone who was checking that information there. So we answered a lot of questions. A lot of individuals did choose to renew their license. Some of the individuals, we expected them to not renew based on individuals who chose to stop practicing or people who had retired. But the board also indicated that if there were any states of emergency that were after the May 28th, as long as there was flexible language to go ahead and proceed as if those licenses are normal, expired after May 28th. So that's what we have been doing. So that has gone fairly smoothly, I think. And we are back to normal in that regards in terms of informing licensees when their licenses are going to expire and letting them know to take action to, pay the renewal fee and make sure that they have the continuing education requirements met. In terms of some legislative updates, we've talked over the last few months about the BSRB bill that ended up being House Bill 2208. That was one of the bills that the BSRB did request from the legislature. It had a lot of statutory changes for licensees and also some measures in terms of out-of-state temporary permits. During the course of the legislative session, about 5 or 6 other bills were amended into that bill, and there were some amendments to the original contents as well. But that bill did pass by very strong margins. And about 2 weeks ago, there was a ceremonial signing of the bill, and it was talked about very highly. Some individuals from the legislature regarded it as the most important piece of legislation affecting mental health in the last 30 years. So I think it's important to kind of hear some of these comments in terms of the positive nature of the bill. We have been working on implementing a lot of the changes in the bill. The original implementation date was going to be upon publication in the statute book. Through the conference committee, that got moved up to upon publication in the Kansas Register. And the last time that we met as an advisory committee, we were waiting for that publication to occur, but we were planning to talk to the board at the May 10th meeting to get a little further direction on what individuals working under the past requirements would have to do to be compliant. So we got some direction from the board at the May 10th meeting. We did officially launch the implementation of that. Our staff worked very hard updating forms, changing the information in terms of the FAQs on the page and answering questions from individuals. And so I'm really proud of the work that they did, because they did a great job in terms of getting all that information out there. We also drafted a letter to licensees to let them know about the changes in the bill and posted that on the board's website as well. Another bill that passed this session, which we are working on the implementation of, is House Bill 2066, and that is a bill that affects expedited licensure timeframes for certain military members, military spouses, and then also individuals wishing or seeking to establish residency in Kansas, and then a handful of other individuals who meet the requirements of that bill. Those are mostly individuals who already have a license in another jurisdiction who meet the requirements of that bill. And the expedited timeframe is from the time the application is considered complete. So we would go through that process, but it will call for us to take some additional actions. We'll have to be tracking the dates of when those applications are received, and then when the file is complete, and then the final date the licenses are processed. The bill calls for the expedited timeframe for military members and military spouses to be 15 days after completion of the file. And then for the other individuals that are seeking to establish residency in Kansas, that's more of a 45-day requirement after the file is considered complete. So like I said, we're working on the implementation of this. The bill was upon publication in the statute book. That's when the implementation is going to occur. We expect that to be sometime in July, so it should be coming up here shortly. The tracking requirements are to start July 1st, so we have been working with the Board of Healing Arts a little bit to try to find a good method to track these individuals using the My Licensing Office or the IMLO system. So we've had some communications with that, and some other regulatory boards are in the same boat too. This is not unique to just the BSRB. So a lot of agencies are working to try to figure out the best way to incorporate these changes. But that's something that's going to be coming up here very soon. And so we're working hard on implementing that. And then
David, quick
yes.
question. Do you have a sense of what your timeline was for like these reciprocity kind of applications or out-of-state licenses prior to this? Or did we not really have that data because of our previous record keeping?
Do you mean for military?
Military and or other states?
No, I mean, it depends.
Mhm.
I can tell you, they don't often send a complete application because I'm trying to work on forms to make them easier to understand. But they think if their license is equivalent, then they get a license here. So, but we try to review them still within 30 days of a complete application.
Okay, thanks.
And I end up contacting them before it's complete because they don't know it's incomplete.
Yeah, and I think one of the tricky things is this bill would call for tracking from the date the application is received, and also tracking from the date the application is considered complete. And I think one of the tricky things for BSRB licenses that may not fit under some of the other license procedures, the way you would submit the application materials, it would be reviewed, and if you have met the qualifications, then you have a certain window of time in a lot of cases to take the examination. And then you may not take the examination right away, or you may take it and then not pass the first time you take it. So it could be a very long period of time from when you initially submit the application to when you actually meet the qualifications and the application is actually complete. Whereas I think with some other licensure boards, you submit the materials, they review them, you meet the qualifications, you get a license. So I think one thing we'll have to do is when we submit a report, because this will call for yearly reports, we'll have to clarify that our process for doing this is different than some of the other regulatory bodies. But as Leslie talked about, yeah, our goal is to do 30 days from the application being complete. But in certain cases, there are materials that have to take a little bit longer to actually be completed. So the time does vary greatly, unfortunately, based on the type of case it is. Just a couple more items in terms of BSRB updates. So per instructions from the governor's office and the Department of Administration, which we received about a month ago, they instructed all state agencies to return individuals to state offices working full-time as of Monday, June 14th. So this is, I think, the second week that we've had all employees back in the office. So that's been great for me to see. I came on board during the pandemic, and so at a lot of time, most of the staff members were working about one day in the office to make sure that we could appropriately space and make sure that everyone was following the health and safety guidelines. So this is my first opportunity to really see the office as it's traditionally functioned. So it's been really helpful for me to see that, and I think it's been nice having everybody back. We did get the option from the Department of Administration to have a telework policy for employees, but we were instructed that if we wanted to offer this as something for employees, it would have to follow the Department of Administration's guidelines, and it would have to be pre-approved. So we went ahead and had a lot of discussions about this. We wanted to try to weigh, the impact of staff coming back after being, working in the office so many days full time, staff retention, different things like that. We did put together a telework policy and submitted it. It's a pilot program for telework. We're starting it very small, but essentially anyone who is teleworking has to fill out some documents, and I'm meeting with them and walking through all the different changes based on how we were working at home versus the official policies. We're trying to evaluate too, which staff members are appropriate to do the kind of work at home versus in the office, lots of things to factor in. But I thought it was important for us to have that as an option and be able to communicate that with people. And if it does show positive results, we can continue to grow it. but the pilot that we put in place will go from June 14th through December 31st, and we'll continue to evaluate it every few months to kind of see, what outcomes are we seeing? Is there any kind of, issues, and then resolving those. And so looking at that as a potential to expand or change. So one other item, or I guess two. So in terms of the budget, we are approaching the end of the fiscal year. June 30th is the end of the fiscal year for states, agencies, and other state entities. And so we are working on those last details. At the board meeting coming up in July, I'll provide some budget information in terms of our fee fund balance and different things like that. One item I've been working on is just those little things like encumbrances and other items that had to be resolved. And then the last item is that as we are now back in the office, as you heard, the script is a little bit different for these meetings. We're no longer under a state of emergency. There's not really the same authorization, but the board and advisory committees can continue to have remote meetings. We don't need to read through all the additional information, but a lot of advisory committees have been discussing if they want to return in person or if they want to continue to do remote meetings or do some sort of a hybrid or blend of the two. So I think it is helpful for us to have a little bit of that information. One item we're working on here in the office is we're working on some of the logistics. We reached out to IT to try to figure out the best way to have a blended setup where we can maybe have some individuals on Zoom where we have them on the screen, but also have individuals here in person and be able to have everyone effectively communicate with each other. As a state building, we have received certain guidelines that if individuals have been vaccinated, they no longer have to social distance, they no longer have to wear masks. However, if individuals haven't, they are still supposed to wear masks and distance as they did during the pandemic. So if meetings begin to be held in person, we'll just have to be aware of some of those logistical details to make sure that we appropriately space everyone in the conference room. But working with IT to figure out the cameras and everything else will be something we'll be dealing with over the next few weeks.
Thank you for that, David. I would ask that maybe we put that discussion item on the new business. I didn't have any new business as such, but I think we can discuss as an advisory committee what that looks like for us. So I'll put a little note that we'll catch up on that later on in the agenda. Does anyone have any comments, questions for David on his report? I'm curious if we've received positive feedback from licensees about the hours changes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Leslie can probably speak to this a little bit more as the licensing manager. So you want to comment on that?
There have been a lot of positive responses. Still a lot of questions. When we write things, we have several people look at it to try and catch every way of thinking, but it never works completely. So there's still been a lot of questions, but people are very grateful.
Yeah, and one nice thing too, well, the number of nice things, a lot of these were recommendations originally that started with the board to try to balance, public protection with also making sure that individuals could still receive services. And I think there were a lot of good items that were in the bill. Yeah, so we received a lot of good feedback from individuals. There was an item that the board weighed in on the May 10th meeting that individuals under a current plan would not have to submit an adjustment to their plan based on these new hours. And I think that has been very helpful, especially for our staff too, but just to make sure that things just smoothly move into the new requirements. But yeah, there's been a lot of really good positive feedback from licensees and also from other members of the public too.
Great. Any other questions or comments from the committee members? Okay, thank you. We'll move into old business, the catching up on some things we just sort of left out there. One of them is the approved supervisors list. So we had discussed at the last meeting, publishing a list on the website. What would that look like? What kind of information would we want? What permissions would we need to obtain? So I'd just like to open up that conversation. Leslie, could I start with you with you reminding everyone that you do have a supervisor's list, just kind of getting us back in that space.
So we have currently that we could put on the website it lists the supervisor's name, first name, last name, and license type and city and state. So that would allow them, to Google and speak to the people that are approved supervisors. We can request that the supervisor list be made with the address and email. But I don't know, didn't feel real comfortable putting that out on the website, even though the information is public and they could technically contact us and get it. It just seems a little,
Out there.
Yeah.
It's a little out there.
So, but of course, it's up to you guys if you want it out there. That's fine. But they can also request it from us and get the names and things like that.
Yeah, thank you. Is there consensus among this group about how much of an access issue this is? That would it be helpful, do we think, to publish it? Is that something we want to do? Or do we like they contact BSRB if they're looking for someone?
I think a lot of students in our program don't have any idea how to, even though I tell them like you can reach out to the BSRB and ask for a list. I don't know if any of them end up doing that. So they end up finding out about postgraduate supervisors through word of mouth or through like a Facebook group page. So, I hear the concern of giving out that much information. So I don't know if there's a way to give out just a list of names at least and location. I don't know, but they just don't feel like they could reach out to the BSRB for that list. I think they're more likely to use that list if it were posted.
We could, I was just thinking about this. We could also put the list with the names and cities and then tell them on the website that they can contact the board for a list with more mailing information or, something like that.
Yeah, that feels like a good, I feel like I just cut somebody off.
Yeah. I agree with Rebecca. I think students tend not to want to contact BSRB because they don't want to bother BSRB for very minute things. If it's something major, they will contact BSRB. And then I guess it's on your side whether or not you want to do that, because that could be a little cumbersome if having to respond to every single inquiry when you can easily post it on a website and people can access it. This, as Mary said, this is public information.
Right.
If they Google the name, they'll get the information, but you could make it one step easier on yourself as well as those seeking approved supervisor to have that information out. Perhaps it could be, the information is out there. And I think as therapists, we have our information, our contact information out there because we want clients to contact us. Why not information on supervisory services?
Jim or Jardine, any thoughts?
Well, as I heard it and looked back, I thought, who are we trying to protect if it's public information, and if it's public information, make it available for people to use it, and that then after, if there's a contact, then, if it's an inappropriate contact, the BSRB can deal with it, as far as that's concerned. But, I would say, make it available to the people that may be needing it.
Yeah, I think for me, the only thing was address information, because some people use their personal address, some people use agency address, that kind of thing, but
Yeah.
We
Don't have
can,
anything different to add. I agree with what's been said.
okay.
we can pull it so it only pulls business addresses. However, some people work out of their home, so it still would give their home address, so.
Why not name, city, and maybe contact, either email or phone, whatever is, I mean, I think email would be the best, but,
Okay,
and Leslie, I have, so then sort of a logistics question for you. Then when, as new people become approved, how much of a problem is that for updating and getting it republished?
if we had planned on updating it like once a month. If there were a lot of people that were approved, we would do it before then, but there's not that many every month. So that's what we were thinking.
Okay, well, it sounds like everyone's in favor of publishing that list. Okay,
Yeah, it's actually
fantastic.
advertisement for the supervisors.
What's that, Joyce?
It's free advertisement for the supervisors.
Yeah,
There you go. And actually, I mean, I think even for me to be able to refer to someone, you know, I know the kind of group of supervisors I generally refer people to if they ask, but yeah, that would be helpful if there's, sometimes I get calls from other geographic locations. It'd be helpful for me too. Okay,
Great.
I'm sorry.
thank you.
Okay. I hope it is helpful. I hope that's the hope. The next item was the approved supervisors training. And this was more of a question about how maybe we can just keep facilitating some opportunities. But we cannot actually create the training, is my understanding, but Jardine, I didn't know if you had opportunity to reach out to MOCAN and see if this is of interest.
I don't have a specific answer from them yet at this point.
Okay, thanks. And I wondered then at the universities if this is something that's discussed at all.
Oh, go ahead, Joyce.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
There's been some discussion. We had a faculty member that hosted a training probably several years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago now. And so they've expressed interest in doing that again. I just don't know when. And so I noticed that there was one that was available through Zoom somewhat recently from somebody in Kansas City. So anybody that was reaching out for questions about training, I started referring them to that person up in that area because they could just Zoom into that training.
Do you remember who that was through?
It was with, I think Michelle Worley was doing it through her private practice, Great Oaks.
And Jardine has sent a link as well. After the last meeting, she sent one through Zur Institute, which met a lot of the criteria. So I'm wondering if we could just pull resources together as sort of a committee and say these are good opportunities. I also wondered, Jardine, if you knew anything from AAMFT, if they were going to resume just the 15-hour and not the 30 or the full. They used to have the other, just the basic and not the full certification. Do you know if they're going to resume that?
I don't know that.
Okay.
AMFT do have the refresher course. I don't remember how many credits that is.
But I don't think you can do the refresher. Can you do the refresher if you're not already an approved supervisor?
I don't know about that. That's a good question.
Yeah, before COVID, they used to do it where you could take the online courses and just get and it would meet all of our criteria. Okay. So would the committee, Jardine sent me some links. Rebecca, I can look at that one, but should we just compile a list? Does that seem like a helpful start?
I can reach out and ask Michelle if she's going to do a training maybe in the near future, because I think she
Okay.
just did it.
Okay. Yeah, and if you send it to me, then I'll create a document for us and we can maybe try to keep updating it. But I think that's where I hear the most discontent is how do I get these trainings? And you know, then maybe that's something MOCAN would want to take on too, is supporting that. But okay, that any other questions or comments or thoughts on that particular item? Okay. The records of deceased practitioners was the next item we had on there. We had Leslie Seawester had sent a resource. Actually, it was, I think, from KDADS about records. But I think our sort of action item here is the board wants the advisory committees to come back with sort of their opinion on whether or not we need to really get some language in our regulations about it. It seems like there's a lot of consensus that we should have something. So how broad or how general that is a question that I was going to see. I'm going to try to pull that up. While I'm looking for that, did anyone else have any feedback in this particular area from last time?
And Mary, if you want me to comment, I can tell you the other advisory committees are still continuing to have discussions on this topic. I think you're right when you talk about there's been a fair amount of consensus so far. Ideas such as perhaps having something on the renewal application, either confirming that you have something in place or maybe something more specific where you actually note who would be the person who would have custodianship of your records should you pass away unexpectedly. One thing that was talked about was how would we verify if we didn't have the name of the person down? And it was discussed that perhaps this could be something that could be, you know, part of the audit process. Perhaps if someone says, I have something down, if they were audited, we would ask them and then they could verify, you know, who that person was. There's pros and cons of each approach. One thing is that if you did have someone specifically listed, should the person pass away, you know, someone could potentially contact us and ask, you know, my practitioner passed away unexpectedly. I honestly have no idea where my records are. And at least we would have something on the renewal form that we could look at and maybe point that person to a specific direction. So, but there has been a fair amount of discussion. The board did discuss this topic too at the last board meeting. I think they indicated too that this could be something that could be a good thing for the out of town board meeting in Olathe in September. But they did ask the advisory committees to continue to weigh in on it too, as they kind of flesh out some ideas in preparation for maybe some official action. One thing is that if the renewal form was modified, and I think you probably talked about this at your last advisory committee meeting too, the regulations should also be modified to provide notice to licensees that this is an expectation, and that's why we're included it in the renewal form. So just wanted to throw in a few more background notes on this topic too.
Yeah, thank you, David. I appreciate that. So what is the consensus of this group that this is something we want to pursue?
I think from our discussion at the last meeting, I think I was pretty well convinced that it's something that's important and that we should encourage people to do. I don't know how much micromanaging the BSRB wants to get into of the specifics of it. I like the idea of maybe having it be a part of an audit so that there's sort of this looming expectation that it's there, rather than having people file a specific plan or a specific document with the BSRB. That might be, I mean, that's another person's job to check and review that. So I'm in favor of it conceptually, but I don't necessarily know where I land on the concrete how to do it.
Makes sense. Thank you.
I
I'm
agree.
with,
So
no, you good this time, Joyce.
I agree. I think it's a great idea. I was wondering whether when we renew our license, it could be on the application of renewal, just a question, who is the custodian of your records in case of a, unexpected business, however you want to say that. Could it be something, so it's BSRB has a.
Yeah, I can see that, as if you're agency, that's an easy answer. And then if you're private practice, you would have an answer. But if you do multiple things, you might have multiple answers for that.
Mary, I'm kind of in the same vein as Jardine, where conceptually it feels important to approach and think about, but kind of the policy and process, I'm not quite sure how much to get into the weeds. I'd love to hear your thoughts as you've heard maybe more discussions about this, or.
Well, I think, from the other disciplines that I've spoken with, it sounds like a very clear cut, yes, you should have a designated custodian of records. And again, from an agency perspective, that would be inherent in their service and in their organization. It does make sense that I wonder how many people actually intentionally think about that when they are starting their businesses or getting into the work a little bit. So I think it's important. I am in favor of the least amount of work for the BSRB to manage and administer. And so, but on the other hand, so I see saying, yes, I have a plan in place. I have an alternate. I have a custodian of records should something happen. The question then is, but from the consumer or the client perspective, how do they know who that is? And so there, it's almost like, I'm not even sure clients would know to contact the BSRB and say, I don't know where my records are. So there seems to be this gap of, does that become part of an informed consent? Does that become a disclosure at the time? Those kind of things, which gets really into the weeds from what the intent, I think, of this is. The intent is, as practitioners, the safeguard is making sure you have a plan for your records. So when I hear about the audit piece, that makes sense to me. That seems like the least amount of work because it's a randomized, it's just like pulling your CEUs and then asking, who's the record holder. But those are the things I worry about. The administration of it, I think is more, it's sort of the onus is on me as a licensee, as a practitioner, to have everything in my practice that is required. And you don't check everything in that practice. You just, my attestation is that I follow the regulations and statutes of my profession. So I sort of weigh that as well. Sort of in favor of a yes checkbox. I have it, but not wanting the BSRB to have to do too much. then what though? That's the other piece that then who knows where the records are. So I'm kind of in the same boat as everyone here.
I wonder if it could be added as a question or two to the clinical training plan.
I was thinking about that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also wonder, I think that there's potential for people to not even know what we're referring to. And so is there a template of some sort or somewhere similar to how we're talking about directing people to resources? Is there somewhere we could direct people for how to set that up and how to document that appropriately? I wondered about that. So I think if I just thinking about people who maybe have just graduated in May and maybe are trying to open an online telehealth practice, I don't think that any of our programs in the state cover how to handle your clients if you suddenly pass away. So they would have no idea how to even do that.
I agree. There needs to be some document somewhere, even to inform the therapist what the custodian's responsibility would be. How would the custodian access your records, and what's their responsibility in terms of informing clients of your passing? And that would be, so I don't see the BSRB doing much other than ensuring that therapists know that they're supposed to have this in place. But how would therapists, what does it mean to have it in place? This is honestly, it's the first time I'm hearing about it too. And I'm trying to think, okay, how do I coach a custodian as to what to do?
Well, I think the way it's set up now, it's after the fact, so it's, person dies and then, so they have all these records, and what are we supposed to do with them? And, because obviously the person didn't ever think about it. So sounds a little bit like an educational thing too.
Yeah, I agree. So I think we're all sort of in the same place of we support the idea, not sure quite on logistics or implementation of it, but perhaps that's something then the larger board will be thinking about that we can bring back after that meeting and discuss further. But I think it is like Joyce even said, now it's something she hadn't really thought about. And so it's driving some conversation. It does remind me, the social work discipline came out with that training manual. And that sort of puts me back in this spot. I know Jardine's mentioned it a couple of times, that there's just some things that would be nice to put out there for people. That is, if this advisory committee wanted to, it's a job we could tackle, is coming up with a very similar template for MFTs. It's not a short amount of work, but that's what they have published out there on the BSRB website. So if you do get a chance to look at that, I think this could be the kind of content that we also include in that. Okay, I appreciate your feedback on that. I did find the document. It was basically a disaster planning document that Leslie sent, which is, so it wasn't as detailed as the kind of things we're talking about. I knew I'd seen it, I just couldn't remember where it was. So thank you for that. I'd like to move on to about the question about the required CEUs for diversity, equity, inclusion. We talked about that at the last board meeting, and we're still sort of battling that around. I think there is a lot of support conceptually for ensuring that there's competency in this area. I think what I heard is there's also concern about a certain, requiring another set of CEUs that are in that 40 hours that we need to do. So we've got the diagnostic, you have the ethics, and then adding in 3 more. So there's a little element of concern about prescribing all of those things. I did give some feedback that I'd heard from this committee last time about having a broader definition of what diversity, equity, inclusion was about. Thinking about our landscape here with rural and frontier, some of those comments that were made. And I heard very clearly that the drive for this is really around racial inequities and cultural inequities specific to race and gender issues. So I think the sense is if this particular issue were approved, the focus would be fairly narrow. And so I just wanted to bring that back up and talk about, is this something that we feel like we want to require of licensees? That's really the first question. The second question then is, how broad can the content be? Because it is important that we are, as practitioners, are trained in competency, cultural competency and inclusion. So I'm just wanting to go back to that again from our conversation last time.
My initial thought is I'm struggling with the narrowness of the definition. And if that's the definition, I'm not on board with that in particular, because I feel, to me, that feels very reactionary to what's happened in the last 18 months in the US, and not necessarily coming from a place of having an understanding of the need for having continuing education around what it truly means, like what diversity and inclusion truly mean. And it's so much bigger than race. Race is important. I mean, as a Black woman, race is important, but so is LGBTQ care. And for me, I wouldn't agree to exclude a group at the expense of another.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jardine, because that's the feedback from you all last time was that it needed to be broad. That, I might work with particular subsets of population, and I want to have all of the training and sensitivity and understanding of that particular population, but I would also need to do this other thing. And so I appreciate your comments on that as well. If it were broad, are you in support of requiring it?
Yes, I was just trying to do the math. And if we added 3 hours, that would be 30% of the 40 hours is prescribed. So still under 50%.
Yeah, it could be that the cultural competence, if it were ethics, it could actually, it could blend.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that with a broader definition. There's just, I won't get on a soapbox, but there's so many ways that could be addressed.
Well, and I just want to add this too. There have been some questions in some other advisory committees in terms of if something could count for multiple categories. For example, if it did count for something like ethics, but also for this category. Currently, the way that we have been evaluating things with the BSRB is that we currently are not counting things for multiple categories. So we would look to see what hours satisfy this requirement and then what other hours satisfy the other requirements. So that is something that could change. Just kind of want to let you know, based on what we've done in the past, this would have to be sort of a new direction if we wanted to go ahead and be able to count things for multiple categories. So.
Well, in my mind, if I go to an ethical considerations of LGBTQ plus population, to me, that is both this and ethics. And so that's where I would want that ability to say, even though I'm still getting 40, I wouldn't short my hours, but I would say, I would think that would be a natural process for us to be thinking about, because a lot of the ethics things I see now are specific to issues that in my mind would be diversity, equity, inclusion. So, but is that something, that's my opinion. Definitely interested to hear everyone else.
So do you mean counting 3 hours in both places for one training?
Yes, but it wouldn't negate my, yeah. So if I went to this, let's say this course of the ethical considerations and the treatment of LGBTQ youth, right?
Mhm.
Let's say I did that. I would say, gosh, that was my ethics training because that's part of my profession, but it also makes sense that it would fall in this. However, I would still have, so those check boxes are met. The category is, but I would still need to get 40. I wouldn't count them for 6 hours. I wouldn't count them for 6 hours, 3 hours, but they fit both categories.
You count the content, not the clock hours.
Correct.
Yeah, and if that would be the will of the advisory committee and then ultimately the will of the board, we would just need direction on that, because currently right now we're counting each hours separately per category. So we really haven't done a practice of counting it for both, but that's, again, it's a choice. We would just want to get some clear direction to go ahead and do that if that was the will of the committee or the board. So.
What are the other opinions on that?
I'm in favor of that because, I mean, I'm just thinking about financially speaking. That's three more hours of an individual category that I'm not having to seek out. And it's not even about money. It's about having to find a specific thing that would fit when I can do that in one. Why not? I think the key though is counting content versus counting hours and explaining to people that if something meets more than one category, if it's ethical considerations in working with a specific diagnostic category, that it may count for your content, but you still have to have up to 40 hours. I think that I could see Leslie feeling lots of phone calls about why did I get dinged on my audit? But it makes sense as we're talking about it here, but that's because we're deep in the weeds about it.
I think managing that for the BSRB could be a bit of a nightmare. So I'm wondering what's the most unnecessary, easiest, but efficient way for BSRB so we're not complicated. But I certainly do support the additional CEUs for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Well, I mean, the BSRB will do what we're expected to do, but currently, if someone, for example, if someone does ethics and diagnosis, they have to have, if the ethics fits in the same category as the diagnosing and treating, they would have to have 9 hours to cover both areas. They can't double dip.
Yeah, currently that's how we've been doing things. Now that could change. We would just, like I said, we want to get some clear direction. And then also 2 other points too. One, the board, as we've heard, has talked about this topic too. And it was indicated that perhaps this would also be a good topic for larger discussion at the offsite meeting in September. But I appreciate you all digging into this, because this is something that if we would change the continuing education requirements, it would call for statutory changes. So it would need to be something that would go into a bill. And which means that for this change to occur, essentially I would be representing the BSRB through testimony to the legislature, and the exact questions you're asking would probably be asked of me in front of committees. So your discussions now are helpful to me to flesh out these details, because those could be asked of me when answering questions on the bill itself. So.
I, again, am in a similar boat as Jardine, where I think having it required is good. And broadening that definition seems more appropriate for a lot of reasons. You know, I'm peeking at AAMFT's diversity and inclusivity statement, and it really has done a wonderful job of broadening it. I can understand why maybe somebody would want it focus more on race and gender. But I feel like that's a little bit actually counterintuitive to what they're probably wanting to accomplish. So I think if we could have our definition be more broad, then it could be a good fit for us.
Yeah, I appreciate those comments. So that's sort of my thinking too. In some ways, this is really what I heard Jardine saying. If you narrow it, you're actually undermining the definition of diversity.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that. I think I have a good sense that we would like this if the definition was broad, and it sounds like we're in support that we would like them to be able to be counted in multiple categories if we were to make this change. Did I hear that correctly from everyone?
I
ahead,
hear
Joyce.
the rationale for it and in favor of it. However, I'm concerned that it opens a loophole too, and that maybe it's not an issue, but there's certainly this, we're creating a loophole for individuals to do an ethics class that has diversity and hence don't go deep into diversity, inclusion, and equity as much as we would like them to. And so they could skirt the issue and not challenge themselves. I feel like that might be a bit of a loophole.
I mean, I could see that. I hear that. I also am thinking about a diagnostic class that could be specific to a population, a particular diagnostic issue among a certain population. And I would feel like that would be diving deep into this particular thing. So I hear what you're saying, and I think we just want to be really mindful of what we want out of this, and so maybe I'm thinking of it too narrowly, selfishly, like if I took that class, I would want that to count.
So do you mean, and I'm sorry, I'm just I want to make sure I understand. So there would need to be diversity, equity, and inclusion, but not a specified number of hours? Or it would be 3 hours, but if it was taken with something else, it would count in both areas?
Well, right now the proposal is 3 hours.
Okay.
But I was thinking that, I was just thinking about a diagnostic issue. Let's say you were a diagnosis and treatment of alcohol use disorder among X population. That would be of interest to many people, and it would seem like that would be definitely learning more about a particular population. Or is the intent of this really a broader scope of competent practice that's diverse and included? And so I'm sort of wrestling with definition.
I'm kind of confused too, so.
Well, what I understood, the initial recommendation was requiring 3 hours of CEUs in diversity, inclusion, and equity, period. And so that it sounds like we're in support of that as long as the definition of broad is broad. And just like in diagnosis, you don't tell us what diagnoses we can get CEUs on.
Right. So it's in how the board defines it, not, we guys were talking about a definition and I was thinking we don't have a definition yet.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Yes.
That's exactly right. I just know that from the feedback when I shared our perspective, it was, well, that's not the intent. And I made a statement referencing, let's say, farmers, for example, because Kansas is a rural and frontier. And if you're treating farmers, you should have some competence around their particular issues and the culture of farming, which is very different than many other professions. Military as an example, since there's, you know, military base here in Wichita, those are the kind of things broadly, those are special populations that if you're going to practice in that, you need to have some relevant knowledge. And yet what I heard was, we want this definition to be, I think, again, on the heels and very much so about knowledge and competence around racial inequity and certain other populations. That makes so much sense to me. The risk is, as was said here, that then 5 years from now, there may be something else that we feel like people need a lot of competency in, but the definition is too narrow. So sounds like a good retreat conversation, David. But I do have, go ahead,
Mary, I
Judy.
also wonder about changing, if they're not willing to change the definition, I think maybe then the name of it should change. If they're really focusing on like racial inequities, like that's really what it's about. It's not necessarily about diversity and inclusion. And then we could consider that point separately, because that's different.
Mhm.
And then I think if that is the definition, then I think you easily walk yourself into political ideology, which is probably not where the BSRB wants to be. And so if we back it up to be broad enough to include special populations, and realistically, if I work in Western Kansas in a town that does not have racial diversity, it is not helpful to me to have a course for 3 hours to treat people that I don't treat. And so I don't know, I think that might be a helpful point to raise as well. Like, yes, there's diversity in the state, but not in all places, and not all people treat diverse clientele. And then again, like I mentioned at the beginning of this, was the political ideology and how people might say that they're trying to be pigeonholed into a particular ideology by having to be trained on racial inequity.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments. As you were talking, I wrote down relevant to practice. And so that that's what I heard out of that, because I thank you. Thank you for those comments. Okay.
Do we have a definition? Is there a definition right now?
No, this discussion started and it was sort of like, take it to your advisory groups, but there wasn't work done on what that definition is. And I think that's what I'm hearing from us. Our recommendation would be, we would really need to understand what that definition is. And the BSRB will need to understand what that definition is in order to check it off as an appropriate category, if that does in fact go through, if that's something we're supportive of.
So is our task to create a definition and develop one for?
So the task right now is for me to know what the MFT advisory committee pulse is, so that when we go to the board retreat where we're really going to hash out whether or not the disciplines want to support this, then I have this committee's perspective. You know, more and more the disciplines are trying to have some level of consensus when we change statute, because then they apply to all, and it isn't like, oh, professional counselors have this and MFTs have this. We're trying as best we can to do that together. This is something that'll come back for sure to this committee to see that if we endorse or not. But I think that's what I heard too, is that definition is going to be critical to our opinion. Okay, anything else on this topic? Ashley, are you trying to say something? Okay, just checking in. Okay, so the bylaw review, gosh, this is another thing that just keeps hanging out on each. And I don't know if anyone's had a chance to go back to those, and I failed to send those out. So this is not urgent work, but there was a request about a year ago that we look at the bylaws and begin kind of making recommendations if they still make sense.
And Mary, you're referring to the board governance document, right?
I am.
Okay. Yeah, I've been talking with the chair of the board a little bit, and I think the plan for the board is to have the board members receive a copy of that board governance document, or the last version of it, from about 10 years ago at the July meeting. And
Okay.
then in between that July meeting, have a chance to review it and then come back to the September meeting with any potential changes. So I think that's kind of the plan for the board is on that document. And so just want to give you a heads up on that, because that'll be coming up next month.
That's wonderful. I will take this off our kind of old business list, because it started about, like I said, I think about a year ago or so. So very good. Well, look at that. David just handled that issue for us. So
Can I clarify? I thought there was a document specific to us and then a document that was overarching for all. Are those different?
there was one particular piece of language, Jardine, and I'm going to find that real quickly.
I think the information about advisory committees is within the board governance.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's helpful.
Yeah, there is a separate document that deals with disciplinary matters, and that's kind of unique to the complaint review committee. But yeah, the board and the advisory committees, all that information is in the same one for the board governance policy.
Okay.
And I can't put my fingers on it, the specific place we were looking on there. I can't
That's okay.
put my finger on it right now. I thought I had it in this folder, but I do not. In terms of new business, then, I think would like to bring up the topic of continuing to meet via Zoom, or whether or not people wanted in-person meetings. I know this committee has met by phone, I mean, way before pandemic times. So what's the committee opinion on continuing to meet this way or in person?
Or both.
Or both, that's right, or hybrid.
Someone really wants to visit.
Although I would love to one day venture to the BSRB, I have enjoyed the convenience of meeting virtually. And I enjoy this better than phone because I can see people.
Yep, I agree with you.
Quality better too.
What was
Yeah,
that?
I'm in agreement. I've had a lot of these conversations lately, and I'm always saying, but I'm in Wichita, so it's 4 hours for me to get to a meeting, and I'm very willing to do that. I have no problem with it, but this is certainly a more efficient means to meet for me personally, and I do prefer it over phone. Rebecca?
I feel like I'm always cutting off Joyce, so I was looking at Joyce to make sure she wasn't gonna. I feel like Zoom works well for this meeting, and it is also convenient, but I also feel like it works well for this meeting.
Okay. Jim?
Well, first of all, you have to remember that I'm in Dodge City, so I always look for an excuse sometime to get out of Dodge. So it doesn't matter to me. I think however you do the meetings, that's good. The only thing I'd say, Mary, is I prefer not to be by phone.
And when you say not by phone, you mean Zoom instead of phone?
Zoom, yeah.
Yes, okay. That's what I thought you meant. I just wanted to clarify. It sounds like there's fairly good consensus there too, that we appreciate this format.
And the only way I'll change my mind is if we're going to meet over lunch. Lunch I can't get here in Manhattan.
Well, and just to let you know a little bit, I spoke about this in the executive director's report. You know, we have certain policies we've been asked to follow as we're a state building. And we are working on a way to have sort of hybrid meetings here with using a screen to show individuals on Zoom and opening up the boardroom if individuals do show up and want to either sit in on the meeting or attend in person. We've had one advisory committee where a member was attending their last meeting, so they wanted to do it in person. So that will be sort of an option if individuals do show up at our office. There will be a place for them. But yeah, we're happy to go with whatever your preference is in an advisory committee, and we'll work on some logistics here so that if individuals do show up or members from the public show up, we'll have that available here in the office too.
Sounds good. Okay, with that, unless there's any topics are there any topics that the committee would like to bring up? Okay, and if there's anything between now and next meeting, please send it to me and I'll add it to our agenda. But it looks like our next meeting then would be, we were on the second Friday, excuse me, if I remember correctly. So that would be August 13th. How does that date look for everyone?
August 13th is clear on the BSRB calendar.
I won't be able to attend that day.
Is there a better Friday for you, Rebecca? I know you'll probably be starting new cohorts right around then, don't you?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I feel like I'm a thorn right now. Well, and that Friday is because we are taking my daughter to meet her kindergarten teacher. I know.
That's important. That's important.
Potentially the 27th, but I, of course, don't want my schedule to be the barrier.
That day won't work for me. Anyone else, do you have a preference on dates? I would move it to 27th ordinarily, but there's a family wedding that day and I'll be heavily busied.
Is there a reason you haven't talked about the 20th?
I can't do the 20th. August is actually not a good month for me at all for Friday.
Yeah, August is not great.
Would we prefer to go to September? No, we have the board retreat in September. What are those dates, David?
Well, so in September, right now, there is the regular board meeting, which is still tentative, but that would be on Monday, September 13th. At the last board meeting, the board discussed they may go ahead and have that to take care of normal business and then focus on other issues. So if they do that, that would mean that Monday, September 13th would be the regular board meeting. The out of town or the retreat would be on Monday, September 27th.
Yeah,
So
and I would.
Sorry, it would begin on that Sunday, the 26th, but the majority of the business would actually be on the Monday, 27th.
What about September 3rd?
Oh no, that's okay. That goes right before Labor Day weekend. I don't know. It's not a problem for me, but I want to just see, sometimes people are out of town and travel and do fun things that time.
I can't do the 3rd, but I can do the 10th or the 17th of September.
Yeah, my hesitancy in September is because I really want to be able to take retreat information and come back. And if we get, I was just thinking if we stay in August, then we likely have an October meeting and then I'd have all the information from the board retreat. That would be my preference is to keep it in August. And I know that's conflictual. Is there a day other than Friday that's better for, or is it just August is bad?
I noticed that, I don't know what other days besides Friday, but you know that there is a fifth Monday and Tuesday.
Yes, the 30th and the 31st. I don't know this, but I've been in enough meetings with Leslie that I can hear her saying it's easier for her to stay on the same day and time. So without having the other folks here, I mean, I could doodle poll it if, or maybe ask David to do for me since it's, or do we want to just settle in on Friday in August and whoever can make it?
I mean, I can, so the 2 Fridays, I don't know, so I'll be traveling. I don't know if I have internet connection, reliable internet connection, but if I do, I will definitely be available. That would be either the 6th or the 13th. The 20th, one semester starts that first week. It's very busy with orientation. But the 6th or the 13th, if you schedule it, if I have internet access where I am, I'll tune in.
Jardine, what about you? What's your opinion?
I don't have any conflicts with any of these dates so far, so I'm pretty flexible with when we can meet. It sounds like we will miss at least one person depending on what day we pick. And my thought would be whatever we can do to have quorum so we can at least have a meeting is probably the best.
Agreed.
And since really the meat and potatoes is going to be after you come back from the retreat, we can make it so that we look at that October date and maybe pick that one ahead of time so people can for sure be at that one.
Well, Mary, how about if I go ahead and send out a doodle poll with some options here?
Okay.
I'm actually going to be out of town on the 6th. There's going to be an NBCC conference for the professional counselors. So,
Okay.
But yeah, I'd be happy to send out some different options to see when other people might have availability. And then I'll look to see which of these options has the most. So mark down any times that you are available, and then I'll look to see how many individuals can attend each of the times and find the one that has the most members who can attend. So.
That sounds great, David. Thank you for that.
Well, and it also sounds like I might be the only one that can't do the 13th, August 13th.
Joyce said she was a maybe.
Oh,
depending on
okay.
where she's at, so we might not have enough people.
Okay.
And to let John know that there's an option.
Yeah, we'll we'll do a quick doodle poll, expect to get that, and then hopefully we can land on our date. And just looking out ahead then, per Jardine's comment, in October.
If you're doing the second Friday, that would be, I think, October 8th.
And that works for me. So let's go ahead and schedule an October 8th meeting and on our calendars, even though the one in between we may not have quite yet. Does that sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
Okay. Anything else this morning? Okay, well, thank you all so much for your input today. It's good to see you all.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Mary,
I'll see you next time.
Mary, would you
Bye.
like to do? Sorry, would you like to do a motion to adjourn?
Oh yes, I'm sorry. I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
I
Bye.
Aye. Okay, thank you all. Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.